Commissioner, you say that you wanted to comment. We were talking about tax practitioners, and one of the things that was said by the minister today, there was some spotlight on the tax practitioners and some of them being in the red when it comes to them filing their taxes. You wanted to make a comment on that before we go into the complexity that Andrew had alluded to before.
Yes, no, thanks very much, Hannah, for giving me the opportunity. Yes, the comments that I wanted to make is we have on register about 34,000 tax practitioners that are registered with SARS as tax practitioners. Remember, these are 34,000 people who are unregulated. There's no law that regulates their behavior and their practice. So there's already a loophole in terms of whether we don't have a sector that might attract some of very adventurous and other dodgy people. So there's already that particular issue, and we are in the process of bringing to Parliament later this year a tax practitioners bill, which will regulate the tax practitioners. So that's one thing. So what the minister said today was to say, look, if you have 34,000 tax practitioners who collectively have about 18,000 outstanding returns at a personal level, you know, it's a question that you need to raise your eyes and say, do we really have a practice of people that are of integrity and that can be trusted to give advice to taxpayers on how to regulate their tax affairs? So that's the one question that we ask. The second one is, these people owe us 260 million of assessed debt at their personal level. So we are raising just the questions to say, we are looking at you tax practitioners. We do believe that you should set the standards and show the way when it comes to compliance, because it's not just compliance to the letter of the law, it's also to the spirit of the law. And if we are building a cadership of tax practitioners who we have all the indications to say that they are not necessarily as kosher as we thought they were, all these days. We're just raising the questions to say, look, this is one sector that you are looking seriously at, because more importantly, you are advising the majority of the people in this country when it comes to their tax affairs. And then on the complexity of high net worth individuals, here we are talking about high net individuals who have complex structures, not that the tax
Commissioner,
structure is complex.
Commissioner, on that complex point, Rob had a question for you. Rob, you wanted to ask something about that.
Mr. Commissioner, I think 34,000 tax practitioners, that's a lot of tax practitioners. I'm not too sure at what levels one's looking at there in terms of where they're registered. Are they still registered? I remember many years ago they had to register. Are they still practicing? Aren't they still practicing? And so on. But there's also a comment that there are 18,000 tax returns outstanding and 260 million rand in tax. Now, if they have 18,000 tax returns, how do you know what they owe if they haven't submitted the tax returns?
Well, we're saying, that's why we separate the two things. We say they have 18,000 outstanding tax returns. And then those that have been assessed owe us 260 million.
So it could be a lot more.
So I hope so.
And if I could just jump in, my father was a doctor, and we felt very ill looked after in those days. When you were sick, he was attending to his patients, and not himself. He was perhaps overweight at times, not in the best of health. The fact that you're a tax practitioner and your own affairs may not be up to scratch. My estate plan, I advise on estate plans, but mine's not particularly good nick at the moment, to be quite frank with you. I don't think that the fact that some tax practitioners may be arrears with their tax means that they're not giving good advice necessarily. And number two, the concept of tax practitioners, as I think Rob was alluding to, covers a broad range of people, from people doing basic returns for salary earners to people like Rob who do complex structuring. So
I would like you to pose a question to the Commissioner, Andrew, because we were talking about complexity and you were saying it has become a lot more difficult. Ask the Commissioner what you would like to as a tax practitioner, because I wouldn't know the details the way you would.
No, I think perhaps it's a statement that the Commissioner can respond to, but the more you make the tax framework complicated, the less the man in the street can access it, the less he can understand it. Particularly things like financial instruments, which came up in the budget, a normal taxpayer who may have some investments and may dabble on a market in bonds and shares will never be able to access or understand the tax laws, and hence you need tax practitioners. So there's this perhaps ill thought out attack on tax practitioners, and perhaps there's a suggestion that tax practitioners are being overly adventurous. But even as a tax practitioner, dealing with the current complexity in the Act is difficult. And the two things seem to be diverging. Are we going to make the tax more simple for the man in the street to understand? Or are we going to make it more complex and make them reliant on tax practitioners?
Commissioner, would you like to respond to that?
No, thanks, Hannah. Our outlook when it comes to making tax policy is very simple. We're saying we would desire to have a state at one point in our lifetime or in our process of making tax policy where we have simple taxes with the broadest base. That's the most excellent way of constructing your tax policy. And on the collection side, it must be a withholding tax. That's how simple we want everything. But the reality of the world is, and we've seen it with the financial crisis, that was precipitated by some debt structures and overgearing and so on, that we need to revise the taxing instruments of some of these instruments that we have in the financial services. And we're not making them complicated. We're simplifying them and making sure that they live up to the evolution of some of these structures that people are cooking up on the side here. So it's not an evolution towards complexity. It's actually an evolution towards simplicity. While we are addressing all the other loopholes that are inherent in the constructions of our tax things. I mean, you saw that on the budget review under Annex C, there are lots of other discussion documents and many other proposals and research projects that we are undertaking to try and simplify and make sure that we tax appropriately some of this emerging new instrument. So I can assure you that there is no intention or any design from our side to make the tax system as complex. We have actually have a very proud history that we have simplified the tax system very much. If you remember at an individual income level, we have simplified the car allowance structures and so on. In others, we have removed all the deductions and allowances to try and make sure that we simplify and make this thing as broad as possible, so that it's as inclusive as possible and as fair as possible. So the notion that our tax system is evolving towards a complex system is actually not borne out in facts if you look at how we have implemented tax policy so far.
Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner. That was Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Opa Makashule. Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner.